All right, brothers and sisters, amen. We are here today for our special event with Mr. Ken Coleman. Ken Coleman is a Detroit historian. Me and him have worked on about 4 projects together at this time. So we have a good relationship. I thank God for him. He also is an award-winning journalist and currently writes for the Michigan Advance, amongst other outlets. So he is definitely the real deal. The real McCoy is here to talk about the history of Second Baptist Church of Detroit, 10 important moments in Second Baptist Church history. So without any further hesitation or delay, let us welcome Dr. Ken Coleman.
Thank you so much, Brother Pastor. It has clearly been, it continues to be a new and outstanding relationship that I've been able to work and partner with, bring bus tours to Second Baptist Church and see the incredible tour that Mrs. Robinson and others lead. And so I am, as I said upstairs at the end of the service, it's a blessing for me to present here at Second Baptist Church. Again, Michigan's oldest African American congregation. I don't have to tell y'all, many of you in the room know the history of this great institution well, but for those that may not know, the Second Baptist Church was founded by 13 men and women in 1836. 1836. That's 1 year. That's 1 year before Michigan, as a state, joined the Union. It was a territory at that time. And in fact, the 13 men and women had to petition the territorial governor to be able to found this great institution. That's not how the process works these days, but that is how the process worked in 1836. And so y'all know, I believe it's March 5th, so that anniversary is coming up, the day in which this great congregation was founded. And a community, at that time, Brother Cleophas Boyd, my good friend, you'll probably know this section of downtown was really sort of known as Germantown. In fact, the 13 individuals who founded the church were able to come into an agreement with a German Reformist church. And the oldest part of this edifice comes from that relationship. I wanted to lift up, I hope I don't get feedback. I usually like to move around. I should probably stay here, this camera's here. I wanted to lift up and dedicate this very short presentation, but I think hopefully it's power-packed. Hopefully you will believe it is so. I wanted to lift it up to an educator who I met. Part of my history is working as a Detroit Public Schools, both community relations executive and then as communications director. But one of the men that I met, even before I was an employee at Detroit Public Schools, and was certainly inspired by, is our brother, our departed, late departed brother, Dr. Nathaniel Leach. Y'all should give him a hand. Many of you know that Dr. Leach was the church historian here, and I spent so many hours at the Detroit Public Library, the main branch on Woodward, in the Burton Historical Collection. And I know many of you have seen the document, the book that I will lift up. How many people were here when Second Baptist Church celebrated its 150th anniversary in 1986? Show of hands, okay. Certainly a couple people there. There was a book, thick book, red bounded book, probably about 200 or 300 pages that Dr. Leach, I believe, as I understand it, led, and it chronicles the history of this great church. And I spent so many evenings and weekends at the Burton Historical Collection going through that 150th anniversary book that celebrates Second Baptist Church's history. And so some of what I lift up over the next several moments will be that, come from that document. But my reporting, I'm also a former Michigan Chronicle reporter, senior editor, and spent many years going through archives, old Michigan Chronicle editions, and obviously a lot of that, a lot of those pages. Remember the green sheet? Y'all remember? the tinted color on the front page of the Michigan Chronicle for several decades was green, and so a lot of people call it the green sheet. But some of that history comes from there. So again, I wanted to start off with the first slide, certainly dedicating this presentation to the great Dr. Nathaniel Leach. Of course, you know he's joined Ancestors many years ago, but was a learned, certainly an important member of this congregation, a learned Detroit Public Schools educator. And in March of 2001, there was a testimonial dinner or event here to celebrate Dr. Leach's life or his work up until that point. You know, one of the things that sort of strikes me about Second Baptist Church, obviously being founded in 1836, as I pointed out, but Michigan, as you all know, and certainly Reverend Rogers lifted up as part of his sermon today, Detroit was an important place along the Underground Railroad. And certainly by extension, Second Baptist Church was a big part of that. And in 1859, the gentleman that you see here is probably very familiar to all of you. Frederick Douglass attended a service here in March of 1859. He was here for many purposes, but one, he had a classic meeting with another abolitionist who happened to be white, named John Brown. And y'all certainly, I see heads nodding, you certainly know of John Brown and his work. White abolitionist, he travels here in March of 1859 from Missouri. A white man, he brought several escaped slaves with him, people of African descent. They're on their way, obviously, first to meet here with Frederick Douglass, just down the street. At another abolitionist home, a man named William Webb, happened to be African American. Brown and Douglass meet in March of 1859. And there's a Michigan historical marker about a half mile away from us on the Blue Cross Blue Shield campus. And that classic meeting, one of the themes of that meeting between John Brown and Frederick Douglass, many of y'all might remember from the history books, John Brown had an idea. Brown wanted to and did band together a number of men who traveled to West Virginia to a military complex or installation called Harper's Ferry. The idea that Brown and the men had was to commandeer that southern, that's in Dixie, so that's the southern, we're headed into the Civil War, but that is slave territory, to be sure. As an abolitionist, John Brown was pushing back against slavery. And this idea of commandeering Harper's Ferry, this military complex in West Virginia, was part of a continuum of opportunities and plans that Brown and others had to end slavery. That action didn't bode well for John Brown at all. Brown and the men weren't successful in commandeering that military complex. In fact, Brown was brought up on charges was tried and sentenced, and then later hanged by the end of the year. So in December of 1859, 6 months after he met Frederick Douglass, a quarter of a mile away from us, Brown was killed, Brown was hanged. It is part of Detroit's history. It's part of our nation's history, and it's certainly part of Second Baptist Church's great history. The road, if you will, the road along looking for freedom for people who look like me, of African descent in this country. Next slide is another familiar face that many of you might know of. He's William Lambert. William Lambert was an African-American businessman here in Detroit during the middle 1800s, certainly a very prominent African-American Detroit resident in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s here in Detroit. He was helped lead, William Lambert did, helped lead a conference that was held right here. I mean, it's grounds where we sit today, Second Baptist Church in 1843. Lambert and others, mainly African Americans, are again, moving toward organizing opportunities to push back on slavery here in America. Lambert was known as one of the conductors, if you will, of the Underground Railroad. As y'all know, the Underground Railroad wasn't a physical train or locomotive. It was a system of routes. Sometimes here with slaves from Missouri. And so there were lots of routes along the Underground Railroad, many of them in Michigan, and obviously because of Michigan's proximity to Canada, Windsor, Ontario, this was a very important space. And obviously Second Baptist Church, just a stone's throw, of course, from the river, made this community, this church community, very important. Many of you know, you've been on the tour, of course, as members, just below the sanctuary is a holding space where slaves were held and to the coast was clear. Its proximity to the river made it very important. And so in 1843, when William Lambert again and others come here, they're organizing much the way we organize in our communities, neighborhood patrols and block clubs and the like. This was, quote, a free state, although what a lot of researchers and historians like myself have learned in recent decades, Michigan did have slavery. It certainly wasn't the chattel slavery that some of us grew up watching as children or adults in the 1970s ABC series Roots. It wasn't that physical chattel form of slavery. It was more like indentured servitude, but Michigan did have a form of slavery. But certainly by 1843, when Lambert and others meet here at Second Baptist Church at what was called a Negro Suffrage Convention, the topic again was trying to find ways to end slavery in America. Lambert is a very important figure. His home site is about a mile away from us, maybe a little bit more than a mile, at the corner of St. Alban and Larned in the Martin Luther King Homes community. For many years, a Michigan historical marker has been there. Unfortunately, it was stolen several years ago and it hasn't been replaced. But if you think about the corner of Larned and St. Alban, that is the home site of William Lambert. Another one of the important moments in Second Baptist Church's history is certainly 1863, just after President Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. 1863, President Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation is issued, and there's a great celebration in Detroit, and a great celebration again right here at Second Baptist Church. 100 years later, in 1963, then Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, was right here in 1963 to affirm and celebrate and recognize the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And this photo from 1963 is LBJ, again, Vice President at that time, unveiling a plaque lifting up the 100th anniversary and the fact that there was a great celebration here at Second Baptist Church. Those of age will know that within months, LBJ ascends to the presidency after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so this was several months before he would become President of the United States. He was right here at Second Baptist Church unveiling the plaque that you see on the slide. I can't talk about Second Baptist Church without talking about the role of education. And many of you know the woman who is on this slide, featured in this slide. She's Fannie Richards. She was a very active member of Second Baptist Church in the 1800s. Fannie was born free in 1840 in Virginia. Her family moved first to Toronto and then moved here. Fannie Richards operated at a private school for African American children right here at Second Baptist Church. But that's not all. Fannie Richards also holds the distinction of being the first African American teacher to be employed by the Detroit Public Schools. Right here, Second Baptist Church member, Fannie Richards. So she has a role, obviously, in education, both as a private school teacher operating a private school that operated here at Second Baptist. And then she and others take the extraordinary step of suing the Detroit Public Schools, and by extension, the state of Michigan. Fannie Richards and others argued that the Detroit Public Schools was running a race discriminatory operation. Operating schools, some for black kids, others for whites. Obviously you might imagine there's going to be a resource difference and drop off in that. And Richards and John Bagley was a member, or happened to be a white man, a member of the Detroit Board of Education. But he also went on to become mayor of Detroit. And later John Bagley becomes governor of Michigan. But in 1869, Richards, Bagley, and others again sued the Detroit Public Schools and the state of Michigan, and were successful at the end of the day. The Michigan Supreme Court agreed with Richards and Bagley that the Detroit Public Schools was running a race discriminatory operation. From 1870 on, and while, and to be sure, race discrimination was always a part, some might argue is still a part, of public school education. From 1870 on, black kids began to go to school with white kids. Fannie Richards gets hired as a Detroit Public School teacher. Again, as I pointed out, the first African American teacher to work for the school district. One of her first students was a man named William Ferguson. And Ferguson is important because Ferguson becomes a lawyer, becomes an adult, becomes a lawyer, and becomes the first black man elected to the Michigan House of Representatives. He was a pupil of Fannie Richards. Fannie Richards was a great church mother, if you will, here at Second Baptist Church, again operating a school for black children here. Some of you know that I'm passionate about posting on social media on this day. X, Y, and Z happened. It's history that usually involves African Americans. I posted earlier this week I guess it's last week now because it's Sunday. I posted that Fannie Richards joined the ancestors this month in 1922 at the age of 81, and after a long career as an educator, and equally important as a great member of Second Baptist Church. Y'all should give her a hand. Also, when we talk about 10 important moments, I can't talk about Second Baptist Church's history without talking about the Reverend A.A. Banks. And many of you probably grew up in the church when he was pastor. Reverend Banks led this great institution from 1947 to his passing in 1977. Certainly pastor of this church at a very pivotal time in Detroit's history, in our country's history. Certainly Reverend Banks was here presiding over this congregation during the heyday of the civil rights years. In fact, the very room that we're in right now would not be here if not for the leadership of Reverend Banks. This whole wing of the church, I think we call it the education wing or activities wing. Reverend Banks led the expansion of the church in a physical sense. And so this activity room, all of the rooms upstairs, were all built during Reverend Banks's leadership here at Second Baptist. He's also important for another reason. In 1962, Michigan voters agreed to, signed off on a new state constitution. So voters from all across the state, a new Michigan constitution. It was the first time that the state's constitution had been revised since 1908. And so there were a lot of things in that 1908 constitution. There are a lot of things in the new constitution that weren't in that 08 constitution. And in 1963, the new constitution goes into effect, and it does two very important things. It creates a statewide Department of Civil Rights, a statewide body that would be a watchdog, and an agency that would push back against race discrimination. That was one facet of the 1963 Michigan Constitution. The other part of it is it created a Civil Rights Commission, sort of a body, if you will, to oversee the department and make sure that there was a commitment by Michigan toward diversity, equity, and inclusion. Reverend Banks was one of the founding members on that body, the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. And he served on the commission for many years, in addition to obviously leading this great institution. Banks is very important. I certainly argue, and we'll see in a later slide, Robert Bradby Sr., obviously the pastor prior to Banks, is very important. Both of them are. But I think a lot of times there's a tendency to remember Robert Bradby Sr.'s leadership from 1910 to 1946, because it was such a big period of time. And there's a lot of history there. Bradby is very important, but I would argue, and this is why I included in 10 important moments in Second Baptist Church history, this is why I argue and added A.A. Banks to my sort of top 10, if you will, or a selected top 10. Of course, we're in Black History Month, and we're in Black History Month, obviously, in February. And obviously, many of us know that Black History Month started out as Black History Week. It's in February because it's the day or the week that it was celebrated represented Frederick Douglass's birthday, the gentleman we saw in an earlier slide, and the birthday of Abraham Lincoln. That was the concept by which this gentleman, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, created first Negro History Week, and then every year since 1976, we've celebrated Black History Month, an expansion of Dr. Woodson's Negro History Week. I lift that up not only to share that history, but Carter G. Woodson was a regular participant or visitor to Second Baptist Church. I count at least no fewer than 5 times in my research of history, no less than 5 times that Dr. Carter G. Woodson presented here at Michigan's oldest African American congregation. One of them is in 1947, where he offers one in a series of Negro History Week presentations. And so members of this great institution, Pastor Rogers, should be proud, and I know you are proud, that this is a faith community that has been the host of some of the very most important and noted scholars in history as it relates to Black life in Detroit. It certainly should be a point of pride, to be sure. Another son of Second Baptist Church, when I talk about 10 important moments, boy, I can't even imagine being in the congregation, being in service, Reverend Rogers, the Sunday that Ralph Bunche was baptized here. Many of you know Ralph Bunche is the learned scholar, becomes a United Nations administrator, helps to negotiate a peace settlement between Arabs and Jews, which manifests itself in the creation of the Israel state. Ralph Bunche was a big part of that. And as a young man, as a 9-year-old, he was baptized right here at Second Baptist Church. Ralph Bunche also holds the distinction of being the first African American to earn a Nobel Peace Prize. Y'all have a great history. This congregation is powerful. Men and women have gone on to be noted members of not only the Detroit community, but the world community. Bunche and his family moved from Detroit when he's about 10 years old, but the foundation that Ralph Bunche had was here in Detroit. And so for many years in the Lower East Side, Brother Cleophas Boyd, you know that we've had a Ralph Bunche school. Well, we currently have one still. Ralph Bunche School. There's a Ralph Bunche co-op a couple of miles from us. And so we, as Detroiters, have realized and recognized the importance of Ralph Bunche's contribution. And certainly the point of pride that Second Baptist Church should certainly have is he's a child of this institution. I also want to point out the NAACP obviously has had a strong presence in Detroit, to be sure. Founded in 1909 in New York City, Niagara. But the Detroit branch of the NAACP has been powerful. And the tradition has been that, and it still is the case today, the largest NAACP branch in the nation is right here in Detroit. It's been a leader in that civil rights organization for obviously now more than a century. Brother Dr. William Osby was one of the he was a founder of the Detroit branch NAACP, one of its early presidents. He was actually president before your former pastor, Robert Bradley Sr., Osby was a major leader, African-American major leader in Detroit in the first part of the 20th century. And when he joined the Ancestors, Osby, when he joined the Ancestors in 1961, his homegoing service was held here, again, at Second Baptist Church. I've mentioned the Reverend Robert Bradby several times. Here's our first opportunity to see a photo of him in a slide. He is pictured on the left of this slide, along with William Peck, his ministerial colleague and the leader of Bethel AME Church. There used to be a tradition. Oh, look at the young people. All right, look at them. Love it, love it. Give them a hand, y'all. Give these young people a hand. They're getting that knowledge. There had been a tradition for many years of joint emancipation services held by Second Baptist Church and Bethel AME Church, like two of the oldest churches in the city. I think Bethel AME is the third African American church, as I pointed out before. Second Baptist is the first. Reverend Bradby and Reverend Peck were leaders of their respective institutions throughout the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Peck died in 1944. Bradby died in 1946. But if you think about it, that's a very pivotal time in our nation's history. It's also a time in our history where the African American population in Detroit is growing exponentially. Consider this. In 1910, there were only 5,700 African Americans who called Detroit home. Only 5,700 in 1910. By 1930, there are 120,000 African Americans who reside in Detroit. And between 1940 and 1950, the city's black population doubles in 10 years, from 149,000 people in 1940 to just over 300,000 in 1950. And so these were pivotal years, and I only mention all that data as a way of pointing out how important emancipation services were in the black church. What's an emancipation service? Well, it's a tradition that started obviously after President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which at least in theory frees slaves, African slaves here in our nation. There was a tradition that after that of black churches, particularly Baptist churches, that either on every New Year's Eve or every New Year's Day, there's a celebration held to celebrate the emancipation of African American slaves. And so in 1937, and this is what this 1937 Detroit Times, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. In 1937, this Detroit Tribune, the Detroit Tribune was an African American owned paper. It preceded the Michigan Chronicle, but both of them operated obviously during that time, or during this time anyway. In 1937, there was an emancipation service held. That year, it was at Bethel AME. My understanding is they would alternate. 1 year it'd be at Bethel, 1 year it'd be at Second. But these two leading men, and one other thing about Robert Bradby Sr., he's a former Detroit NAACP president, and Reverend Peck founded the Booker T. Washington Business Association in 1930. And so these were, as the vernacular goes with young people, these were major dudes, without question. And so this is a 1937 ad from the Detroit Tribune. Again, another of what I'm calling top 10 important moments in Second Baptist Church history. And so I thank you for the opportunity to present A couple of you have asked, how does one get in touch with me? And so on this last slide that I will hold here, freeze it, these are ways in which on social media or through email or through telephone, I can be reached. And so I'll leave this here. Oftentimes, what people tend to do is if you have a smartphone, you can just take a photo of it, or you can certainly jot it down like some of you are doing. I thank you for the opportunity. Pastor Rogers, again, you have been a great friend and obviously a tremendous leader here at Second Baptist Church. I value our friendship, and I certainly value the opportunity to spend some time with you all today. Thank you.
All right, anybody, well, first off, anybody learn anything new today?
Yeah, I
Raise your
did.
hand up. Let's see, you learned something new.
Yeah.
Amen. Look like most people raise their hand up. Yeah. All right, wonderful. All right, anybody want to have any dialogue or any reflections or any questions you might have for Dr. Coleman? We have one over here.
Yes, sir.
Don meeting, I just, two quick things.
Sure.
When you were talking about Reverend Bradley and the relationship with Bethel,
Yes.
and during that time frame, I just want to bring up that those two men had to manage the 1943 riots.
Indeed.
Which were traumatic for
Indeed.
the black community here. And secondly, not necessarily your Hall of Fame of people or your important points, but Edward Davis,
Indeed.
who was
Great automotive giant.
absolutely. And only reason I bring him up because I had the opportunity to know him. So,
Oh, indeed. And, I could do 100. Reverend Rogers and I said, let's just do 10. And, no particular order. But what's important, I think, I'm glad you lifted up Ed Davis. First African-American Big Three auto dealer. But before that, Brother Boyd, you probably know that Edward Davis was a Studebaker dealer. Now, people are like, you got to be a certain age to even know the name Studebaker, but it was a major automotive manufacturer. Not one that survived all the years, and so now we talk about the Big Three and the Detroit Three. But Ed Davis was a major dude, and so not only those two things, he, in 1971, I believe, during the Roman Gribbs mayoralty, Edward Davis becomes the director, and at that time they called them commissioners, of the old DSR. Do y'all remember that? Anybody remember that? We call it the Department of Transportation today, but DSR was the entity that managed our public transportation. Ed Davis is another major dude, and I'm glad you lifted him up. Thank you.
All right, anybody else have a question, comment, remarks for? Oh, can you repeat what they say for me?
Yes.
I have one right here. And
Yes. I'm gonna do my Phil Donahue Oprah.
Just a statement, I'm an artist, but I'm also a nurse. And in nursing school, you learn what's called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's shaped like a pyramid, and the top of the pyramid is where you become like one of those 100 people that realizes self-actualization. But you can't get there unless you have the base of the pyramid, which is food, water, warmth, clothing. The next one is actually safety. And there's 5 levels. So everyone is important in this story that made so these great founders had those first 3 rungs of the pyramid. Yeah.
I think that's important to note, and I think that's what this congregation has. I think what the great work that y'all have done historically at Second Baptist is help to provide that foundation. sometimes a safe harbor, just for people to realize that you know, self-actualization. So I mean, it's very important. I'm glad that you lifted it up. Any other? Oh, you.
When I don't need the microphone.
Yeah, because it's being brought. I should probably get back over there.
DERS, which is the Historical Committee, has placed Ed Davis's book in the bookstore if you're interested. One Man's Way, $10. Thank you very much for the support.
Thank you, Mrs. Robinson. And you know, Reverend Rogers and I talked about this potential opportunity. And when there are people like Mrs. Robinson in the audience, the pressure is on.
I gotta make sure my facts are right. I double check Mrs. Robinson, my PowerPoint, because I don't want you to come back and say, all right now. But thank you so much. I don't know if we have any other.
Yeah, I think we have one more.
Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah. All right. With Detroit having a plethora of Underground Railroad sites, have there been any efforts by the sites to work together to promote that in terms of tourism and membership for each of the churches? I almost feel like they work separately, even though it's the Underground Railroad site, which all work together. So I was wondering, was there ever any histories that was shared about those sites working together and sustaining itself, especially if most of them came from Second Baptist?
So you are right. I'm probably not the best person to speak to that. It might, Ms. Robinson maybe, but I will say this. One of the things that's really important that's happening now, and I had a chance to present before the State Board of Education last Tuesday, and in a presentation that was similar to this, I pointed out all the work that many of these institutions are doing, homes of worship, governmental institutions, the Michigan Freedom Trail, to answer, I think, part of your question, the Michigan Freedom Trail Commission has put together an interactive website that now really sort of links all these opportunities, not only in Detroit, but throughout the state. Many people don't know that the Underground Railroad, was a system of routes that went as far west in Michigan as Cassopolis and Niles. I think Mrs. Robinson, who helps lead the tour effort, might have a specific answer to your question.
And absolutely, we do collaborate.
Hey,
Bethel,
are you gonna do this when they
St.
walk around
Matthews,
and stuff?
First Congregation, we do collaborate often. Reverend Marty Hood, who set up the program over there at First Congregation, when she retired, she became a member of Second Baptist and joined the Historical Committee. And I was trying to find out because the National Park Service tried to say Benjamin Willoughby was a member of Second Baptist. I said, he is nowhere in our history. So I reached out to Bethel, I reached out to St. Matthew. They both said he was not a member of their churches either. I reached out to the author who wrote the book. I forgot the name of the book right now, but it's in the bookstore. She said, no, Benjamin Willoughby was not a member. So, and even Jamon Jordan tried to tell me Benjamin Willoughby was a member. Roy Finkenbein tried to tell me. So when somebody tells me something, it's just my nature, so don't be offended. I have to check it out. It's just my nature. Even my husband gets upset because I don't care who tells me, before I can put it in my repertoire, I must check it out. Benjamin Willoughby was not a member of Second Baptist. My research said after he left First Baptist, he didn't attend any church. So yes, we do collaborate. Richard and I collaborate quite often. Richard Smith, Dr. Richard Smith, that is.
I would like to take this moment to just ask us to all collectively clap for the great work that Sister Robinson has done for the book of history. Praise God. Anybody else have any comments or questions? All right, we thank God for Dr. Coleman and his work and his presentation today. And we thank God for the work he put in stopping by Second Baptist. Can we clap for him again?
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Yes. All right, would you like to say any final remarks?
No, sir. Again, always a pleasure to be in the house, again, at Michigan's oldest African-American congregation. It's great to see so many people, take the time to hear the presentation. It sounded as if maybe there's some things that I was able to share that people didn't know or might have, may have forgotten. I think the history is important. And as I close, again, contact information is here. I've got a great opportunity this month to do a number of presentations about the different elements of African American life in Detroit. And this is the highlight of the month for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I just want to add one more thing. As we go through the evolution of life, we find out new information. I'm not saying someone wasn't telling the truth back in the day or whatever, but I'm saying as time goes on, more information comes available, just like, and I don't want anyone to get upset when we say, oh, that's not true, or that history, whatever. No, I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm just saying sometimes we find other information that supports new, supported information that says we need to change our mindset. For instance, 13 former slaves. We now know, hello?
Yeah, okay.
We now know that I have been able to prove that 3 of them were not former slaves. So now we say 13 very determined people of color, some of who were former slaves. Okay? So as this information comes up, don't get an attitude, just like somebody was speaking, I think it was you, Ken. Somebody was speaking here one Sunday, and I was sitting here with Deacon Davis, I'm sorry, and the person said, one of the oldest churches in the Midwest, and Ron whispered, the oldest, and I started to say, no, we're not. He goes in there, no, we're not the oldest, we're one of the oldest in the Midwest, and I sent him the information of the church in Ohio that was founded like 5 years before we were. So when you come across information, check it out.
Indeed.
And you were taught, don't go to just one site, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. You mentioned you went to the Burton Museum, the
Yes,
Burton Library.
Yes, ma'am.
And I told them before I went, I don't want anything but Dr. Leach. I have all of his information. I need some other information. What did they bring me? All of Dr. Leach's information. I wanted information that would support or not support what Dr. Leach had.
Yes, ma'am. It's evolving.
Hey,
That's what
praise
history is.
God. Praise God. Clap, Sister Robinson. Y'all, all of this, you're passionate about history, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. Very passionate about history, and you can see the passion. And what she's really discussing is simply that when you study anything, including history, you're going to get new sources. You're going to find out new information. And as you get new sources, the information will change. It will be improved, because we want it to be as accurate as it can be. That's all she's talking about. And so when those times come, I've had this conversation with Sister Robinson, and we adapt and we move forward. But again, let's come to Sister Robinson, the great job she's done. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying and for participating in this endeavor. I pray it was encouraging to you.
Yes.
It inspires you. And Malcolm X said that history is the pursuit that stands most to reward our current endeavors. That's a paraphrase. That's a Rogers paraphrase version. But what he was really saying is that if we learn our history, if we allow it to become a part of us, it can inform us to do great work today. And I really don't like to study history in a vacuum. I like to study history in a way to say, how can this inform the things that we do today? So as we leave this place, let us continue to think about how can we live out the legacy of our great forebears. Let's go to God in prayer. Dear Lord in heaven, we thank you so much for blessing us with this day, and we thank you for blessing us with this whole service. But right now, we thank you for this moment of reflection, dear Lord, to see the mighty works you have done through men and women who were Second Baptist members or were affiliated with our congregation. I pray the Lord that this information might inspire us to do great works today. Ask you to bless Dr. Coleman. Thank you for his time. Bless everyone here that are the custodians of our history, including Sister Robinson and the good folks of Durst. And be with us all, dear Lord, as we continue to brainstorm and come together and allow your spirit to move us to do great things. And maybe 100 years from now, people will say what we allow for you to do through us today. In Jesus' name we pray and ask all these things. Amen.
Great job. Great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Great job. Great job. Kiki.
I want to do a lot of research. So I need some time.
Thank you.
I'm a former worked for Brother Scott in the 90s.
Okay. I'll be in touch.
Thank you, brother. I got a good handle on it. All right, take care. God bless.